Hello, and thank you for joining me today. In this video, I'm making an envelope-style organizer with a confetti quilted panel. I've already gathered some of my tiniest fabric scraps. For this project, I chose a blue color palette, so I collected every blue scrap I could find. I also added a few gray and black pieces for contrast. To get started, I need a base layer for all those little scraps. Today, I'm using a thin, viscose cleaning cloth from the household aisle at my local supermarket. A base like this can be almost anything. It all depends on how much thickness and structure I want in the finished piece. I want this organizer to be fairly thin and flat, so I chose one of the lightest options I had. Even a piece of unwanted fabric would work, because this layer will not be visible in the finished project. I like using these cleaning cloths because they are soft, strong, inexpensive, and easy to find. This particular one contains 70% viscose. It is machine washable and presses well, which makes it very practical for sewing projects. The cloth measures approximately 20 by 14 inches. For this project, I cut a piece that measures 18 by 11 inches. That should be more than enough for my envelope organizer. The size can really be anything. Once it is quilted, this kind of panel is sturdy enough for a bag, a cosmetic pouch, a pillow, or many other sewing projects. To give my base layer a little more structure, I'm fusing lightweight interfacing to one side. I press the entire surface thoroughly, so the adhesive bonds well. This makes the cloth firmer, smoother, and much easier to work with. Next, I need a large piece of cardboard. Mine is simply one side of an old cardboard box, and I'll arrange all the layers on top of it. The cardboard works like a portable tray for the entire project. I can move everything without worrying about loose scraps falling onto the floor. I can also carry the whole arrangement over to my pressing area without disturbing any of the pieces. I place the cardboard on my table, add the prepared viscose base, and then cover it with strips of fusible web. Fusible web is different from fusible interfacing. It is simply a very thin, heat-activated adhesive that bonds on both sides. I bought this roll on Temu, and it is approximately 4 inches or 10 centimeters wide. Once I've arranged all my fabric scraps, I'll be able to lift the cardboard and carefully carry the entire piece over to my pressing area. The fusible web will melt and hold the layers together, helping the design stay just as I arranged it. And that is what all this preparation is for. Now for the fun part, and probably the most time-consuming part of the process. I cut the scraps into smaller pieces with scissors and slowly distribute them across the entire surface. At this stage, it feels a little like painting with fabric. The scraps could become landscapes, flowers, geometric shapes, or almost any other design. It is a very interesting way to create an unusual fabric surface. For this piece, I'm keeping the design abstract. I'm mixing different shades of blue and spreading them evenly across the base. I want the finished panel to look almost like a little burst of blue fireworks, without a specific image or repeating pattern. This part does take time. Arranging all these scraps took me a little over an hour. That is another reason why I enjoy working on a piece of cardboard instead of directly on my sewing table. If I need to stop, I can carefully cover the project with another piece of cardboard, weigh it down with something flat, and move it out of the way. Later, I can bring the board back to my table and continue from exactly where I left off. For now, I keep adding blue scraps and filling in all the little empty spaces. Once the entire base is covered, I can add a few brighter, decorative details on top. I found some sparkly fabrics in my scrap collection, so I cut a few slightly larger pieces and scattered them across the surface. I want the finished panel to catch the light. Sequins, metallic thread, or other decorative fibers could also be added at this stage, if they worked with the design. I also found this small, round motif that I crocheted some time ago using sparkly yarn. I think it looks lovely against the blue background, so I decided to include it in the panel. Next, I cover the entire surface with a layer of fine tulle. I have both blue and black tulle, so I place each one over the scraps to see how it changes the overall look. I prefer the blue. It keeps the colors bright and makes the whole panel look a little more festive. I cut a piece of tulle to match the size of my panel. Now I can carry everything over to the iron and activate the fusible web. Not every scrap will be fused perfectly. Some pieces are resting directly on the adhesive, while others overlap and sit on top of other scraps. That is perfectly fine. The goal at this stage is simply to hold enough of the layers in place so the panel is safer and easier to move. Before applying any heat, I cover the entire surface with a pressing cloth. The cotton scraps and the viscose base handle the heat well, but the synthetic tulle could melt if the iron touched it directly. The pressing cloth protects that delicate top layer. After pressing, the layers are holding together quite well. They almost behave like one piece now. I can safely move the panel to my sewing machine without worrying that the whole arrangement will fall apart. Now I can move on to the quilting. First, I need to choose my thread. Confetti quilting needs fairly dense stitching. The fusible web only keeps everything in place for now. The quilting does the real work of permanently securing all the layers. It will make the finished panel sturdy, practical, and able to hold its shape. I gathered all the blue threads I had and tried several different shades against the panel. In the end, I chose this bright blue thread. I like how it coordinates with the blue tulle. I also need a fabric for the back of the panel. This fabric will become the inside of the finished envelope, so it will remain visible. I chose a blue fabric that coordinates with both the confetti surface and the quilting thread. With everything selected, I can finally begin quilting at the sewing machine. First, I move the panel to my sewing table and remove the cardboard. I'm going to do most of the quilting before adding the backing fabric. I want to sew lots of straight lines in different directions. But because the backing will be visible inside the finished envelope, I don't want every one of those lines to show on it. For now, I'm quilting through the tulle, the fabric scraps, and the prepared viscose base. Once the quilting feels dense enough and almost every little scrap is securely held in place, I'll add the backing fabric. Then, I'll sew several more lines through all the layers. Those final lines will join the front and back together. And here it is, my finished confetti panel. I'm very happy with the way it turned out. Everything feels securely attached, and the surface looks bright, textured, and unusual. Now I only need to trim away the uneven edges and square up the panel. I decided to use the crocheted motif as my guide and position it in the center. After measuring everything, I marked a rectangle that is 10 by 16.5 inches. This places the crocheted detail right in the middle. I don't trim the panel immediately. First, I stitch very close to the marked line. This secures all the tiny scraps along the edges before I cut anything away. As you can see, the stitching runs right beside the marked line. Now I can trim the panel without worrying that any of the small fabric pieces will escape from the edges. And here is the finished rectangle, all neat and even. There are still a few marks from my fabric pen, and this blue surface will remain visible in the finished organizer. I use a damp cloth and a little water to remove as much of the marking as possible. Some fabric markers that are designed to disappear with heat or steam can still leave a faint ghost line on certain fabrics. Now that the damp area has dried, the line is barely visible. I could wipe it once more, but it will probably continue to fade with use. So, I'm happy to leave it as it is. Next, I round the two corners that will form the flap of the envelope. I'm rounding the end with the crocheted motif, so this detail will be clearly visible on the finished flap. Once again, before trimming the corners, I stitch close to the new cutting line. This keeps all the layers secure along the curved edges. The panel is now ready to be folded into an envelope. I'm going to finish the edges with fabric binding. From the remaining blue fabric, I cut strips that are 1.5 inches wide. My panel is quite thin, so I don't need anything wider for this project. First, I bind the lower, straight edge. I attach the binding from the wrong side, fold it over the edge, and finish it from the right side. After that, I fold the panel into the envelope shape. To make sure both sides are even, I use my ruler to measure the same distance from the edge on each side. This helps me place the fold exactly where I want it. Once I'm happy with the shape, I add binding around the remaining outer edge. I fold the binding over the raw edges and secure it with sewing clips all the way around the envelope. Just as before, I sew the first line from the inside and finish the second line from the front. And that is it. My envelope organizer is finished. It could be left just as it is or closed with a button or a magnetic snap. I decided to add small plastic snaps. They blend nicely with the colorful fabric scraps and keep the envelope securely closed. Now it is completely finished. An organizer like this could be used for notebooks, pens, or small study and craft supplies. A larger version could hold full-size notebooks or loose sheets of paper. I made this one for my sewing room. I have quite a few handmade rulers, templates, and cardboard shapes like these. I'm constantly misplacing them and then cutting new ones. So I decided to remake the useful ones from sturdy cardboard and keep them neatly together in this envelope folder. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed seeing how I made this unusual confetti quilted organizer. I'm already planning to make a small bag using the same technique. Next time, instead of scattering the scraps randomly, I would like to arrange them into a recognizable picture. And of course, I'll film the whole process and share it with you.